The vast majority of content creators these days are working in two formats: the 16:9 HD or UHD for video, and the square and a half of the 35mm full frame for still. What's the most logical way to divide space within these formats? Let's start with standard 16:9 dimension video. Simple center lines are always a bold statement which lead to force, and this is as basic as it gets. Now that you found the center, the next level up would be thirds, which you can find using the armature of any rectangle. This is the most common theme in design because it works equally as well with short and long rectangles, like the square and a quarter that's a standard dimension for social media feeds, to widescreen anamorphic or CinemaScope at 2.39. I would argue that anybody, doesn't have to be a content creator, would consider thirds to be the sweet spot in most spaces. Think of like an interview setup on a 2cam where you need an open area for copy, or some epic scene in cinema widescreen. And here's the thing about HD or the UHD space is that it's super close to a root 3 golden rectangle in dimension. And the special properties of the root 3 is that the golden section falls directly on thirds. When two systems align, that just gives you a higher probability of that area being optimal for whatever you want to place there. And the same is true for the 35mm square and a half. Halves, thirds, golden section. And look how close thirds are to its secondary reciprocal. But that's not the example here of two systems aligning. It's not exact. The two systems are simply thirds and the square, which on a square and a half rectangle, of course, is thirds. And while I do like using the section in the 1.5, it's a little bit more advanced, I still prefer the square, because it's both symmetrical and dynamic. And I find these diagonals more interesting because they're less obvious. For example, going back to 16:9, it's really obvious the angle of this procession is based on the rectangle's primary diagonal. Somewhat obvious the mic pole and other elements are based on thirds, and not so obvious that these major diagonals are based on the square. I'm going to throw these grids up on Flickr as PNGs, and if you're a design nerd like me and you're bored and you want something to play with, you can download them.